Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in the clown world. Though this topic of clown world isn't news just from today or even this week, we go all the way back 3 years to find out exactly what turns people from simple climate activists to full-on anti-natalists, while poking fun at all the copes they have along the way. Though honestly, as I've done my reconnaissance on this subject, the specific case we are going through today really isn't that bad. But I still think it's interesting, because to literally say I think we should start seeping off our population is actually quite a radical thing to say, because taken to its extreme, that's basically saying I want extinction of the human race. But in an act of being charitable, we should get into what they actually say themselves. So, first off, we are going to go through a BBC Stories segment back from 3 years ago in 2018. And from what I can tell, this woman was forefront of an official anti-natalist campaign, at least in the United Kingdom. So let's have a look at what she has to say.
I don't think it's selfish to not have children. Why would that be selfish? I guess the implication is that it means I only think of myself and I'm the most important person in my life, but that's fine. That doesn't mean I'm selfish. In fact, I'm being selfless.
I mean, already she is going through copious amounts of cope. Firstly, she asks the rhetorical question of, well, how is not wanting to have kids selfish? And then tries to steelman an answer to that question, which is obviously, well, you're only focusing on yourself and you clearly only care about your life and not wanting to provide for others. She then finishes that point and then says, well, that's fine, which I agree with. It is fine not to want to have kids and even be selfish in that regard and own it. But she takes a different tact and says, well, that's not selfish, and even goes one step further and says this is selfless. And I think it's already going to be in the same vein as Roger Hallam did in the last video, where he basically said it's for the greater good if someone dies at one of my protests, because people will start talking about climate change more seriously. And I think this is going to be her point. It's that I'm not having kids and it's going to save billions of lives.
Although that makes me sound like a real prick, so don't put that.
Alternatively, she's going to realise that she has said something colossally stupid. Though to be fair, a lot of people realise they say something stupid and then carry on with the same point anyway. So we go through a couple of graphics explaining that we currently have 7.6 billion people on the planet. Well, that was 3 years ago. And by 2050, we'll probably have just under 10 billion. Just to set up her point, basically, which is fine. And it then goes into this. Don't make the joke, don't make the joke, don't make the joke, don't make the joke.
When I was a kid, I kind of assumed that I would have children when I grew up, because everybody does, and that just seems to be the natural order of things.
Yes, it's called survival of the species. It's also called the family unit. It's also called passing on your memory and your virtues to your direct offspring. Or for those unfortunate enough to not be able to produce offspring, adoptive children. It's how we keep our civilizations flourishing. Though to be fair, from the things you've said so far, it might actually be a good thing you haven't.
But as I became a little bit older, in my teenage years and into my early 20s, I realised that I could make a choice to not have children, and actually having kids wasn't something that really attracted me. I remember being at a school placement, so I trained to be a teacher, and I was a little bit overwhelmed by the number of children in the school.
Yeah, but to be fair, dealing with 30-odd kids in a single year of a particular age is completely different from raising a child from cradle till, well, these days, till they're in their mid-20s. Though in a defence, I can completely see why becoming a teacher would put you off kids.
And I just kind of thought, actually, I'm very happy to work with children, but perhaps I don't really want mine when I go home at the end of the day.
Again, there's nothing particularly wrong with this. If individual women want to make this choice, that is completely up to them. The point that a lot of people like me say is that, well, when it comes down to it, an awful lot of women do get the natural instinct to then want children in their 30s, especially when they haven't got any. And we also say it's an outright lie that everyone should have careers, including every woman. But that is a thing that is constantly said at school, at universities. It's all about directing you to a career. And while we do have personal and relationship lessons at school, at least in my time at school, it was an hour a week. In fact, no, I think it was an hour every 2 weeks, and they were playing garbage. I didn't really instill to you that one day you might actually have a family. It was more trying to tell you how you interact with the opposite sex of your own age. Which was cringe even for me, someone who wasn't particularly good at it at that age. I say that like I'm any better now.
My friends or other people who I met would say, oh, you'll change your mind, or wait till your biological clock kicks in. And I would smile and say, perhaps.
Oh, there you go. Again, that's fine. I don't have an issue with this at all. It's entirely up to her whether she has kids or not. Should she have kids? Probably yes. There's no point trying to force someone to become a parent who doesn't want to become one. They will not be a good parent.
It started off just being, oh, I just don't want to have children, and then I became aware that actually the best thing I can do for the environment is not to have any children.
Oh boy, here we go. Yes, the worst thing we can do for the environment is get more people on the planet. Despite the fact that in most Western countries at the very least, our carbon emissions are going down, and that's basically the only thing you care about when it comes to the environment anyway. Which, spoiler alert by the way, it isn't. There are many factors that go into climate change, let alone the rest of environmentalism. And the reason a lot of people start going anti-natal is because they were already basically anti-natal. They just want this big overarching narrative that lets them call themselves a saviour for being anti-natal. And that's the whole reason I wanted to go through this video, and already the seeds are sown for this, so let's have a look.
Now I would call myself an environmentalist, and I try and live in a way that is as sustainable as possible. So that's things like cycling everywhere, and I'm a vegan. I don't shower every day. I don't wash my hair every day. In fact, I only wash my hair about once a month.
Oh my lord. Why are all these people always so weird? I mean, it was alright when she was saying, oh, I'm cycling and I'm vegan, even though veganism is cringe. Yes, I'm looking at you, proper horror show. But to say that basically you're doing quite a bit of workout, cycling isn't easy, and then admit, oh, I don't shower every day, while you cycle every day, I'm just thinking, wow, that is really grim. And this is why I generally don't like climate activists, because usually all they have to do is say, I'm a climate activist, therefore can go along with all these bad habits and vices. And I think it's the opposite of how a human should live. And don't get me wrong, cycling and focusing on your diet, even if it is vegan, you know, I'd say they're virtues to an extent. But then that's very low level compared to the vices that are piled on top, such as not keeping up with your personal hygiene and being anti-natalist.
It's inescapable that having kids in the first place creates a resource-consuming person.
Yes, people do indeed need resources. What is your point?
It's not me trying to sound like no one should have kids, but it's kind of a fact.
I mean, she's acting exactly like the red flag meme currently going around on Twitter, where it's like, oh, I'm not saying people shouldn't have kids, but, and then it's just a whole wave of red flags. It's exactly the same as people who say they support free speech, but. Just take it as a point that they don't support free speech. This woman doesn't support anyone having kids. Now, at least it's just at a point where she's not saying no one should have kids by law, or going as far as China did with the one-child policy. But I still think it's a pretty bad position to hold.
If I fell pregnant, I would have an abortion.
Oh, grim. That's what she says, by the way. They just clip that. They're like, if I was pregnant, I'd have an abortion. And that's it. That's something you should probably dwell on a bit more. You're ultimately ending a human life.
I had one particular relationship where the not having children thing was the reason that we broke up. He knew from the beginning that I didn't want to have children, but he was desperate to have his own. Well,
that's another thing I didn't even think about. If you're anti-natalist, you're probably limiting yourself to who you can actually date, because a lot of men, whether they know it or not, do actually want to have kids.
He kind of assumed that I would change my mind because we were together and we were in love. He would try and convince me that I did want to have children with him, and he'd tell me, you'd look so sexy pregnant. I
mean, that's a bit weird. But yeah, ultimately, relationships are negotiations at the end of the day. And if that's just something you can't negotiate on and it's a dead no, then fair enough, I can see why you broke up.
The fact was, I didn't want to have kids, his or anyone else's, and if he wanted to have children, he'd have to find another woman, which is what he did.
I don't know if the BBC is trying to make me feel sorry for her, but I mean, I just can't. I've seen many relationships end for many different reasons. And obviously, if I personally know someone who was in a relationship and they break up and they took it badly, obviously I feel bad for them. But for a complete strangers, no, I don't care, BBC.
I guess that it's quite lucky that I have never been broody, because it means I don't feel that I'm making a sacrifice. However, if I were to have that biological clock kicking in that everyone tells me is going to happen, I would now say no.
Man, if you think you can say no to what your body's shouting at you, best of luck.
Even if I did become broody, now I would make a conscious decision not to have children because of that reason. I don't want to contribute to a global population.
And this is another really weird thing. I don't want to contribute to a global population. Well, you are just by living. I don't get why these people are all like, oh, I won't have kids, but I'll stay on the planet. I mean, okay, fair enough, you are making a new addition to that population, but it's well within your power to take away from that global population as well. So I'm really hoping they ask her about that.
People will often project their own lifestyles onto you, or their life choices, or whatever it is, and so I find I try not to be offended or annoyed or patronised by people who say, you know, oh, you'll change your mind, because actually this is a conscious choice that I have made, and it is something that I really, really believe in, and I genuinely do not want to have children, and that's okay.
So there you go, it was basically cope after cope after cope after cope. But hey, if she is making an informed decision on this case, that is absolutely fine. I just hope she's found something meaningful in her life, so I decided to have a bit of a look into her. So she does have a Wikipedia page, and according to the Wikipedia page, she is a cyclist, author and sustainable transport campaigner. All seems okay. She is currently the director of Flight Free UK. Again, fair enough, you want to be against airplanes, getting people from place to place, that is fine, it's not going to go well, but fair enough, clearly she's big into the activism. But then it finishes off, as well as being on the board of the charity Population Matters, and this is the one I'm going to look into. So luckily they have an entire About Us page on their website, so let's go through it. What we want. Population concern and family size are sensitive and sometimes controversial issues. Population Matters is driven by our vision and a desire to create a sustainable future for all through positive voluntary solutions that people freely choose and which improve their lives. On this page, we'll try to address concerns people might have about Population Matters, what we believe, what we want, and what we do. So far, nothing to complain about. Everything they say is voluntary, and they are just trying to be activists to get people to stop having kids. Obviously, I disagree with them trying to encourage people to stop having kids. So first things first, they oppose coercion. We believe in human rights, freedom to choose, and empowering people. We are wholly opposed to population control, forced sterilisation or abortions, limits on family size or any other activity which treats people as numbers or tools. The right to have children or to have none is a human right. Population Matters aims to enable women and men to access family planning and have the choice to do that. So basically all this stuff exists already in the Western world. In the third world, possibly not. Next, they have a whole thing on women's rights, which is just normal feminist jargon. You know what it already says. And next is a bit of a weird one, because I don't exactly know what they mean. So we promote reduced consumption as well as sustainable population. Population Matters aims to achieve a sustainable future in which all humans and animals can thrive. In order to achieve that, people must take action to address not just total population size, but consumption too. While birth rates are comparatively low in most developed nations, each individual consumes at rates which are simply unsustainable. For that reason, Population Matters advocates sustainable lifestyles back to the use of technologies and policies which reduce our impact and supports progress towards global and environmental justice. Action to address the international problem of population doesn't mean we don't have to look in the mirror and make changes to the way we live as individuals, or to the system which preserves global inequality. This is what I mean. That was all just claptrap. None of that really said anything. Live sustainably, lower consumption, things like that. They're not specifics. I don't really know what they mean, and in the end they just go on to say the usual Marxist stuff like, oh, this system just preserves global inequality. Every single charity seems to do this, and it's incredibly annoying. We also, and most importantly, advocate for smaller family sizes across the world, and including the rich parts of the world, which immediately and effectively contribute to reduced consumption by reducing the numbers of new consumers. But then they've got this weird graphic at the bottom, which is supposed to be the number of Earths needed if everyone used renewable resources at the same rate as these individual countries. And it's a really weird way of making the point that renewable energy resources are garbage. Apparently, if everyone, the 7.6 billion people we have on Earth at the moment, used energy the same way the USA does, we need 5 Earths if we just use renewable resources. So why would we ever use renewable resources then? they undermine their point in a way I don't think they meant to. I also have incredibly high doubts that if everyone lived as the Indian does, we'd only need 0.7 Earths of renewable energy resources to power the planet for all the people. India is where we outsource all of our technology and software development. They're going to need incredible amounts of power. They even have their own space agency. Don't give me this garbage. I do not trust these numbers. Anyway, quickly going through their next one, which is honestly their main point, but it's biblical, so I can't be bothered going through it properly. They say, we believe population is a problem in rich and poor countries alike. And they actually do make a few good points here. Basically saying that all countries need to reduce their population growth rates. And this means both rich countries and poor countries. And they do actually acknowledge that rich countries do already have lower birth rates, but unfortunately their carbon footprint per capita is bigger. But then they also make the point that as poorer countries come out of poverty, their per capita carbon emissions rise right up. So this is the thing, they've really read into Malthus's ideas on population sustainability. I mean, unfortunately, it's all bollocks when you look into it. But it's not like this charity haven't done their research. I'm actually relatively impressed. They then have this weird bit on migration, where the title is Migration is Good, but it brings challenges. In which the conclusion they say is Population Matters believes it is the right at this point in time for countries to have control over immigration as a means of achieving a sustainable population, as long as this is done with general consideration of the positive and negative effects on other countries, including the countries people leave and other possible destination countries. Overall, an effective, ethical and just global framework addressing population, demographics and migration would be best mechanism for governing migration. These are complex issues without simple solutions. They will not be solved without a mature, evidence-based debate, free of ideological positions, rhetoric and snap judgments. Population Matters is dedicated to contributing positively to that mature debate. So they are actually against open borders. But their main reasoning for that is that basically it's because a load of people want to migrate over to richer countries where they have more opportunities, and then they'll essentially become consumers there and increase their carbon footprint. So really when they say, oh, this isn't that simple, they're only coming to the debate from one very specific angle, which is that of the quote-unquote climate crisis, rather than the many factors that play into immigration, both good and bad. But obviously they've just come out as in favour of controlled immigration, which is probably why they've had to put this, again, really weird last point in, which is, we deplore and condemn racist interpretations of population. Race has nothing to do with population or family size. It's true that places where population growth is most acute are mostly, though not all, in sub-Saharan Africa, but that is a consequence of poverty, not ethnicity. The legacy of colonialism and exploitative and unjust trade and relationships between the global north and south are significant contributors to this poverty. So yeah, I agree with all this, but I never made this assumption. But they've obviously had to put this in because quite a lot of people have gone, ooh, you want to control the population. Didn't quite a few racists want to do that as well? And, you know, ooh, you're treating black countries quite a bit differently to white countries. Is that a racial thing? Because these people are obviously trying to be on board with the trendy opinion of everything that the West has done in the past is pure evil. Well, obviously, every other country in the world is a massive dindu, and obviously slavery never happened anywhere outside of the Atlantic Triangle. So obviously they've said we don't want any coercion, but at the same time we want to fight biology, because most people on the planet want to have kids. And your first 3 points are basically your feminism in the third world arguments, which I'm all for, which are empowering women and girls, i.e. giving them equal rights in the third world, where they are treated as second-class citizens. The second is removing barriers to contraception, probably a good idea if you are aiming to reduce unwanted pregnancies. And finally, quality education for all. Which, yes, improving all three of these things, I mean, you know, the first one sounds really cringe, empowering women and girls. Yeah, they just mean have equal rights for them. And the other two, as I say, really aren't bad ideas if you do want to reduce the amount of unwanted pregnancies. Now, exactly what they mean by this might be a bit different to what exactly I mean by this, but the point I really wanted to make is that the first world has all three of these things, the third world doesn't. So point number 4 is really the one aimed at first world countries, which is global justice and sustainable economies. The UN projects that population growth over the next century will be driven by the world's very poorest countries. Escaping poverty is not just a fundamental human right, okay, but a vital way of bringing birth rates down. At least that second part's true. The solutions above all help to decrease poverty. In addition, lower child mortality through improved access to healthcare and better economic opportunities lead to smaller family size also. Basically, you take people out of poverty, yeah, as you say, you're going to have smaller families. International aid, fair trade and global justice are all tools to help bring global population back to sustainable levels. What do they even mean back? I don't know what... Back to what year exactly? A more equal distribution of resources and transitioning away from our damaged growth-dependent economic system are key to a better future for people and planet. I mean, growth-dependent, I agree. I don't think we should be in a situation where we depend on endless growth, but that doesn't mean that we have to then redistribute wealth. We don't need to become communists to stop that. We actually need to become free market capitalists. And their last choice, again, it's just a whole nothing. It just says exercising the choice. In the developed world, most of us have the power to choose the size of our families, although we may also face pressure of all kinds over the size of the families we choose to have. When making choices about that, it's important to remember that people in rich parts of the world have a disproportionate impact on the global environment through our high level of consumption and greenhouse gas emissions, blah 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 blah. It's basically guilting you into having no kids. So as you can probably tell, all of these solutions are things that are going on anyway and things that absolutely everyone supports apart from having a smaller family. Because some people want 3 kids, some people want 5, others want none. That's all okay. And this is a choice in the Western world. When it comes to those in poverty, they rely on kids to help out with family income. Maybe there's a family farm that they really need kids to help out on. And improving their economic situation is probably a very good way to get them out of that position. But back to the point, everything that they want as a solution is already in place, especially for the first world. Or if it's not in place, at least there are numerous, probably even thousands of campaign groups actually successfully implementing what they want. So how in any way is them being anti-natal helping in any way? And what's their issue if the population is actually rounding out and plateauing at around 10 or so billion by the end of the century? Well, they actually have a whole myth-busting page, in which the first one is trying to bust what I just said, which is population is going to stop growing soon anyway, which is true. But they just say it just isn't true. Unless we do something about it, the UN median projection for the future population sees us hitting about 10.9 billion, so it's close to 11 billion, fair enough, by the end of the century. And it still hasn't plateaued by that point. Currently, there is only a 1 in 4 chance of population stabilisation by 2100? 2100? What would you call that? I don't know. We can bring about the end of growth sooner and achieve a more sustainable population size, but only if we take the action needed now. What do they mean by growth? Do they mean the end to the growth of population or of economics? Because this is another issue. Clearly they do have some Marxist doctrine within their ranks, and because of that they are probably going to think that economics is all a zero-sum game, which it isn't. So they probably see the expansion of consumerism and the everlasting growth of economics requiring that we need an everlasting growth of population, which isn't the case because quite a lot of things are going to get automated, and that means you'll need less human productivity for the places where automation is kicked in. But even ignoring that, clearly from the graph they've put up, the solid blue line is the median population growth projection by the UN, and that is, if it's not plateaued by the end of the century, it's pretty damn close to it, or it may as well be. It's only, quote-unquote, what they would call worst-case scenario where that isn't the case. Best-case scenario, we're losing people. And this isn't even taking into account the fact that we'll probably have regular space travel and people living on colonies on Mars and the Moon by the end of the century. I mean, when that happens, you'll have what happened with the British Empire, where there's just a mass exodus of people, though that'll mainly be from the First World, where that technology has just put William Shatner into space. Now, there are a lot of quote-unquote myths they need to bust, but I'm only going to focus on the arguments that I myself would make. So one I'd make is that older generations do need younger generations to be sustainable. Hence we keep getting rises in retirement age. So they just say to this that isn't the case. those young people will also become old, which is a complete missing of the point. The idea that we need more people to support older generations is an unsustainable pyramid scheme, benefiting the present generation at the expense of the next. Instead, we need to grasp the opportunities presented by an ageing population, including less unemployment, a stimulus to greater productivity, especially exploiting new technologies, and the availability of fit, talented, retired people to contribute to our communities. Raise the retirement age. We must address the challenges creatively and positively, and if we truly value our older people, that includes investing more resources into their well-being, which takes younger people. Recent reports have highlighted the opportunities available and how important it is to reframe the debate about ageing. The alternative to creative and positive approach to ageing is constantly increasing our population in a vain attempt to catch up. That means continued climate change, continued biodiversity loss, and continued depletion in the Earth's resources. Again, this is what I mean when I said before that they think population growth and economic growth are the same thing and will inevitably mean that we need to take more land, but they seem to completely forget the fact that, say, your iPhone or smartphone, whatever, has replaced about 20 other technologies. You know, it's your phone now. Well, it was always your phone. It's your camera now. It's your internet browser now. A lot of people only have laptops and a smartphone now because that's all they feel they need. It's even turning into your wallet because it can hold on to plane and train tickets along with being a replacement for your contactless card. So we don't need to put resource into making cash as much. But anyway, they continue. We can provide better support for the elderly if we choose. We cannot bring back melted glaciers or species which have gone extinct. Well, I mean, if cloning technology gets good enough, we actually can bring back species, but that is a bit sci-fi at the moment. But also that thing about glaciers is wrong. Glaciers have come and gone throughout the Earth's life cycle. In terms of a generation, it's probably going to be very difficult, but on a technical level, you can actually bring them back. But again, their solution is just a whole lot of nothing. It's literally a Roger Hallam again. It's, look, we want a complete change of the global system, and for these specific issues you're worried about, we'll just get experts in to fix it. It's mental. It's absolutely mental. This is why I'm part of the Wellington Project. In our articles we've put up so far, if we have noticed an issue, we will have a specific solution. An easy example being anytime we talk about freedom of speech, especially when it comes to online speech, we say, get rid of Section 127 in the Malicious Communications Act, because that's what got Count Dankula and all the other people who have been sent fines or jail time for being insulting online. Another point I'd make is that you can't really reduce population without coercion, and what I mean by that is in the short term, which is what they're after. So their response to that is, you can actually do it without coercion. Coercive measures like China's one-child policy are not needed and abuse people's human rights. Totally agree. Time and time again, fertility rates have been brought down quickly and substantially in many parts of the world through ethical positive measures. To address our current environmental crisis and achieve a global population that Earth can sustain and a decent quality of life, we have more to do, better and quicker than we have ever done before. That goal is achievable, and the recipe is short and sweet. And it's all the stuff they said before. Empower women, provide good education, have good modern family planning, which does include abortion to these people, and challenge harmful beliefs that oppress women and lead to large families and encourage smaller families. Yeah, I totally agree with all that. And as I keep saying, there's loads of different charities as well that are going forward with that, and they are currently doing that. Do you think that's going quick enough? I don't think you are, because you are constantly going on about it and still pressuring for more. So is it going to be good enough for you? And if it isn't, are you going to have to go to coercion? So you can go through all the rest of their myth busting. The points that I'd make are pretty much like that. They just completely sidestep the issue, and they just seem to have an incredibly positive attitude towards this, which is, you know, admirable, but at the same time I think it's completely unrealistic. But the main reason I wanted to go through this today is because this appears to be infecting parts of the right. As the Spectator decided to publish this article this week, having a child is the grandest act of climate destruction, which is a psychopathic statement. And this is part of the reason why I hate climate alarmism so much, because of this first paragraph. He says, about 4 years ago, my wife and I, who are both in our 30s, briefly thought we were having a baby. For the next few nights, my dreams were of nuclear flashes lighting up the sky, of the earth cracking open, and of waves lapping on the front door. Humans are swiftly making the planet uninhabitable. Why would we want to bring another human being into the world? I'll admit that my climate anxiety is as melodramatic as it is severe, but polls show that I am not alone, and the figures of declining birth rates speak for themselves. For a population to sustain itself, the average woman has to have 2.1 children in her lifetime. In 2017, that figure was just 1.74 in the UK, and thanks in part to fears about the future of the planet, it's now around 1.6. So, he's thrown out a whole bunch of facts there. Basically, to be sustainable, women need at least 2 children. But that's not been happening in the UK. And he says thanks to climate alarmism, or fears of the future of the planet, which I will just call climate alarmism, he makes out like that's a good thing, and I'm completely the opposite. Because, as you may know as fans of the channel, my degree's in geology, so I looked at the history of the climate of the planet, plus what's going to probably happen in the future. Basically, the trends we have now, especially since a lot of first world countries are reducing their carbon footprint, there's nothing we can't handle. So, have kids. It's not going to make a difference. It's going to be fine. Don't worry about it. Most of us will be off the planet by the time that we have to deal with it anyway. At which point, our carbon footprint will be basically nothing. And it actually gets worse with this paragraph. Everything inside me says have children, but it's everything outside that makes so many of my generation say no. The scientific consensus is clear: unless we all take drastic steps to limit our carbon emissions, the planet will become uninhabitable. This is not what the climate consensus is. The consensus is simple. It basically says humans are contributing to the climate emissions such as CO2 and other greenhouse gases, and this is causing climate change. The consensus is not that it will become uninhabitable, and many scientists disagree with this alarmism. He carries on saying he doesn't believe humanity will coordinate those steps in time. He doesn't even know what those steps are. They just say we need to be dramatic. We need massive changes in the way we live. No one actually knows what they are. None of these articles ever say what they are. Apart from this one who's saying, oh, just don't have kids. It's like, yeah. I'm sure that's the only reason we want to have less kids in the world. The choice for parenthood is based on hopes for the future, so of course it's affected when that future looks hopeless. Climate alarmism's just ruined people. It's literally turned people against their own biology. And he goes through what he thinks is going to happen, which is in this paragraph. So last year the IPCC, the UN's climate change panel, modelled a future for our children in which climate devastation intensifies. In this scenario, food grows scarce as warming seas destroy marine life. Since when do we grow food in the sea? And ice sheets collapse. Flooding consumes land across the globe while newly released microbes and emboldened mosquitoes flourish, adding fever to violent heat waves and extreme weather, worsening beyond many people's ability to cope, at which point the human reactions are only too predictable. The IPCC set out 5 potential futures. The above described scenario is the most optimistic. And the usual criticism for this is it is a model. We've been modelling the climate for years and we keep getting it wrong. Though the science is getting better, the models still appear to be way off. Now that isn't to say we can completely ignore the fact that, yes, there are weather events and extreme weather events that seem to be more frequent. The problem is that this is where the thought process for this article stops. If you actually look at the number of deaths from natural disasters, which does include extreme weather events, you'll see that the numbers have gone way down over this century. And since 2000, no year really goes above 500,000 deaths from a natural disaster, which is incredible to look at with the rest of the graphs, because earlier in the 20th century, especially before 1970, you'd regularly see over 1 million people die from them a year. So you really have to take into account that, yes, our defences against these things are incredibly good, and our defences are only getting better. So basically I'm saying look at the whole story, but everyone who is anti-natalist and says it's for the climate is basically just using post hoc rationalisation. You are not a saviour of the planet because you don't have kids. To even think so is beyond ridiculous. But anyway, that's everything I had for you today. So, as usual, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.